Daniel was a fat, disgusting loner who was bullied by all of his classmates for being the ugliest pig in school. One night, he woke up in another body, having acquired the finest face card and gym rat abs. Before he knew it, he had become the hottest star in their school, and his K-pop charm opened every girl's floodgate. However, before Daniel became that handsome idol, he spent his days as the slave of his ruthless bully, Logan. On a random day, Daniel groveled on the bathroom floor while Logan and his crew were getting turned up from smoking cheap cancer sticks. They hated him because he was ugly and overweight, so they called him a pig and commanded him to dance around like a circus animal. However, no matter what Daniel did, he could never satisfy the bullies, and they always ended up punching his face into a pulp. Back at home, Daniel took his anger out on his mom, telling her that she was the reason he became so fat and miserable. He tried asking her if he could transfer to another school, but she told him that they couldn't afford it and that he would lose touch with all of his classmates. But after years of being treated like garbage, he slammed his fists into the kitchen wall and ran off into his room. The next day at school, Daniel stood in fear as Logan and his friends placed bets on who would hit him the hardest. One of the guys, a professional soccer player, shot the ball right in Daniel's face, and it knocked him straight to the ground. Logan was furious with Daniel for letting him win, so he punched him deep in the gut, knocking the air out of his lungs, and picked him up to hit him a second time. But Daniel's mom arrived and tried forcing him to let go as she lashed out at Logan for hurting her son. Daniel felt embarrassed by the whole scene, so he screamed at her, telling her to get lost. When he returned home, Daniel felt bad for his outburst at school, and he apologized to his mom for what he had done. After finally understanding the extent of how badly he had been bullied, she forgave him and promised to transfer him to another school. However, his mother told him that she couldn't tag along because of her new job, but she swore to do her best as a mother to support him. Those words made Daniel cry, and he made an inner promise to do better and provide for his mom in the future. When he arrived at the location of his new apartment, he was excited about the prospect of starting a new journey. Daniel went into the city in search of something to eat, and while he couldn't help but marvel at the various sights along the way, he accidentally bumped into a hot girl on the street, Mira. Her boyfriend Zach came along, and they were about to leave when Daniel flashed his awkward smile. Zach was convinced that Daniel was a lonely loser who was after his girl, so he challenged him to a street fight. Daniel was determined to stand up for himself in this new city, so he clenched his fists and got ready to fight. However, before he could make a move, Zach landed a hard blow on his face, throwing him to the ground. As Daniel tried to get up and run, Zach grabbed his hair and punched him harder a second time. While people took pictures of how badly he was getting beaten, he kept on going, even after Mira begged him to stop, until Daniel became unconscious and wiped out from all the beating. With no more dignity left, Daniel returned to his apartment and cried his eyes out after seeing the post of his beatdown on the internet. He wondered why he had been born with such bad luck and began to doubt whether his life would ever improve, even in the new city. In the middle of the night, Daniel woke up and immediately felt like he was standing on higher ground. After stumbling into the bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror but was shocked at the reflection that he got in return. Somehow, in the course of his sleep, his spirit was transferred into the body of a tall and handsome demigod. However, his original body was still sleeping on the bedroom floor, and when he tried to confirm if it was alive, he immediately switched back. He initially thought it was all a dream, but was surprised to see that the demigod's body was lying right next to him. Once he got back into the other body, he wondered if he should call the cops for help. However, when he remembered all the torture he went through as a short and ugly fatso, he quickly had a change of mind and decided to use this new body to make up for his awful past. The following morning, Daniel arrived at his new school and everyone was blown away by his good looks. As he walked into the class and introduced himself, all the girls had their floodgates open. He took a seat at the back of the class and was shocked to discover that the girl from yesterday and her brutal boyfriend were among his new classmates. Zoe came over to his seat and tried seducing him with her giant cannonballs, and even Mira thought he was hot as fuck. However, the teacher yelled at Zoe to return to her seat, but she later followed Daniel to the cafeteria. Daniel revealed that he chose the fashion major because of the low grades he got at his former school. However, when Zoe asked him for his reason for choosing the major, he lied and told her that he enjoyed fashion. Back in class, Daniel found it difficult to concentrate due to his fatigue from the previous day, and he fell asleep halfway through the lecture. Suddenly, he switched back into his fatso body and immediately freaked out because of the fear of being discovered. He tried forcing himself back to sleep, but he was too refreshed from the long slumber to return to that state. Luckily, Zoe came over and scared him into waking up, telling him that the class was over. He then thanked her for saving him and heaved a sigh of relief for escaping his nightmare body. Later that night, Daniel attempted to use his demigod charm to secure a part-time job as a cashier at a local convenience store. He planned to get the job for his fatso persona to work throughout the night while his perfect body got the beauty sleep needed to remain handsome each morning. The manager was immediately convinced to employ Daniel because he envisioned the potential earnings from having such a handsome employee. However, his hopes were crushed when Daniel informed him that he was getting the job for a friend instead. And after a few minutes, Daniel's fatso persona appeared. Seeing his fat, disgusting body, the manager was reluctant to employ him at first. But Daniel impressed him with his vast knowledge of cancer flavors, and he ended up securing the job instantly. For the first time in his life, he was finally going to be earning a living, and he was put in charge of the store for the night shifts. Just 5 fucking minutes later, Zach and his crew walked in, trying to purchase a few bottles of body toxins. Zach was about to let things slide with the fatso, but when he discovered that his name was the same as Mr. Steele, he quickly lost his temper and punched him in the face. He even jumped behind the register stand and beat him until he was bloody. His lackeys took embarrassing pictures of Daniel's plot to prevent him from reporting them to the police, and they took off from the store. The next day at school, Daniel stood and watched Zach and his crew laugh at the naked pictures they took of his fatso persona. The crew praised Zach for beating him up, and they told everyone that his mother was probably as disgusting as him. Unable to bear the indirect insults to him or his mom any longer, Daniel interrupted their conversation and told them not to use the fatso's mom in their jokes anymore. Zach wasn't ready to take orders from the new kid, so he rose and challenged him to a fight. He threw the first punch but was immediately held back by another classmate, Jay, who opposed fighting. However, Zach broke free from his grip and threw another punch in Daniel's direction. This time, though, Daniel tapped into his demigod's abilities and dodged the second punch along with all the others that Zach threw at him. Daniel kept on dodging until Zach pushed him against the lockers and launched a deadly blow towards his face. However, rather than dodging this time, Daniel stood his ground and blocked the punch, shocking everyone in class. Zach tried going in for another blow, but in that instant, Daniel remembered all the times that he had been bullied, and he channeled all his energy into one huge punch, bashing Zach in the gut and forcing him to surrender. The crowd of students went wild with excitement, and they all hailed him for winning the fight. The news of his knockout punch reached the leaders of other departments, and they became agitated and determined to take him down. Later that night, a strange boy named Ji-ho quietly walked into the store and picked up a pack of cancer sticks. Daniel knew something was off, but when he invited him to the counter to pay, the boy rushed out of the building. As Daniel ran after him, he realized the potential consequences he would face if his boss found out about the incident. But when he finally reached the alley, he saw Zach's friends. It was at that moment that he knew he fucked up, and that Ji-ho was just another victim of bullying. He begged them to pay for the stolen item, but they all laughed at him. Do grabbed him by the shoulder, threatening to post more embarrassing pictures of him on the internet if he continued to ask for payment. When they tried to make him fight with Ji-ho, a man named Vasco interrupted their bullshit, grabbing Do by his neck and lifting him above the ground. He questioned the reason for his actions, so Do begged him to let them go, and they promised not to trouble the boys ever again. After they left, Vasco advised Daniel and Ji-ho to start working out to build their combat strength. The next day, Vasco stopped by the school cafeteria to see the new student everyone had been talking about. He found Daniel, along with the school's top bullies, and decided to teach him a lesson. So, he held Daniel by the shoulder and forced him to sit in a chair. However, to everyone's surprise, Daniel grabbed his hand and released Vasco's grip from his shoulder. Vasco was about to throw a punch at Daniel, but Jace intervened and stopped him, apologizing to Daniel as he escorted Vasco away. When his friends got mad at Jace's intervention, he pointed at the redness on Vasco's wrist, saying that Vasco would have been the one to get knocked out. The 3 bullies from last night hurried over to Daniel and showered him with praise, begging him to be their friend. This was the first time in his life that he ever felt like someone wanted to be his friend. And Zoe asked him to join them for a fun night of drinking PG grape juice, so Daniel decided to give it a try. That evening, Daniel joined Do and his company at their regular drinking spot. However, Zach arrived and he became uncomfortable seeing Daniel around them, so he decided to drink heavily. Zoe noticed that Daniel was wearing an oversized shirt and asked him why, but Daniel was determined to keep his secrets hidden, so he lied that it belonged to his roommate. After a few minutes, Do began making fun of the victims he had bullied and attempted to show Zoe some of their pictures on his phone. However, Daniel grabbed it and crushed it with his hands, warning them never to bully other people again. Having drunk too much grape juice, Daniel collapsed onto the table and realized he had accidentally woken up in his disgusting body. That said, he immediately ran to the PG grape juice party, lying to everyone that he was just bringing Daniel home for an errand. The following day, Daniel returned home from school and was surprised to find his mom waiting for him. Since she didn't know who he was, he introduced himself as Daniel's friend, but she wanted to know more about him and suggested they go out to eat. After arriving at a fine restaurant, she noticed Daniel's presence was drawing everyone's attention and wished her fatso son were with them. After they discussed how their lives were going, she called the waiter over and asked if she could take the trash boxes with her. Seeing her collect all those boxes, Daniel realized that his mom had been collecting garbage just so that she could afford to send him to school. As she prepared to leave, she offered to give him some money, but he declined, saying he had enough with him. She continued insisting until he eventually took it. Still, at that same time, Vasco saw him taking the money and was extremely angry at Daniel for taking advantage of an old lady. So later that day, he confronted Daniel, telling him that he was about to teach him a lesson and ignoring his attempts to resolve the situation. He charged forward, launching a punch towards him, but Daniel smoothly evaded the attack. Vasco didn't stop, so he continued throwing punches and kicks, but Daniel narrowly dodged all of his attacks. However, one of his blows landed on Daniel's face, causing him to question why he was being attacked. Vasco demanded that he return the money that the old lady had given him, but Daniel refused and evaded another kick. Daniel's subsequent punch didn't do any damage to Vasco, but soon enough he remembered the moves he learned from Zach. He charged toward him, expertly evading his punch, and with precision, he delivered a mighty blow with his elbow, leaving Vasco unconscious. As he left, he asked Jace to take care of him. Later that night, Vasco stopped by the store, and after seeing the fatso loser, he told him to begin training in case he ever needed to use his muscles for combat. Daniel listened to his words and began doing push-ups, but all the Doritos he had been eating tired him out, and he fell onto his belly. As a young lady named Crystal entered the store, she was impressed by his effort and bought him a drink, making him realize that he had found the love of his life to simp over. That said, he swore to become a gym bro and to never give up on his goal of having a ripped body. The following day at school, Daniel rescued a fat student, Duke, from being bullied by Vin and his lackeys. The students then began to wonder why Daniel was standing up for the loser. Jay was concerned about him and the rumors, which claimed he came from a poor family, so he became determined to help him. At the convenience store, Crystal, with an endearing charm, walked in and tried asking for Fatso's number, but he was too ashamed and told her that he didn't have a phone. However, she smiled and encouraged him to believe in himself, assuring him that he looked like a strong stallion. In the cafeteria, Duke questioned why Daniel had invited him, saying he didn't have any money to pay for protection. However, Daniel told him that he only desired to be friends with him because they shared similar interests. When Duke heard those words, he became furious, suspecting he was being toyed with because Daniel had always looked very rich. So there was no reason he would settle for a loser like him. As Daniel walked home, he came across Jay, who gave him a new set of clothes for his birthday. So after accepting it, Daniel discovered the clothes were worth a fortune and soon noticed another gift at his doorstep. The following day, he walked into the class wearing his new designer brands, and all the students were stunned to see him, beginning to wonder how he could afford such expensive items. Later that day, Duke was bullied again, and Vin and his crew demanded that he give them his McDonald's money. But since he didn't have any, they punched him in the stomach and tore his audition form for a talent show, commanding that he become their errand boy until he was fully paid. As he delivered their meals, they called him a pig, hitting him on the head and asking him to bring them water. However, despite his efforts, they tripped him and asked him to go again. Having seen enough, Daniel stood up to defend him, so Jay and Zach followed him for support, ready to take on the bullies. Suddenly, another group appeared, prepared to make it a three-way battle, as Vasco also decided to show up in the middle of the commotion, needing some screen time to challenge Daniel to another fight. He was then stopped by his crew, who were afraid of seeing him being humiliated in the presence of all the students. Daniel blamed himself for Duke's troubles and tried fixing the audition form. But as he gave it back, Duke confronted him for pretending to be a good person. He believed Daniel only did it to gain popularity, so he told him he wasn't a fool, and that the humiliation he faced only increased his passion for rap music, like his favorite rapper, Eminem. As the days passed, Duke was beaten up by his bullies, who turned him into their punching bag, demanding that he quit the renowned talent show. He tried fighting back, but ended up losing his note of musical lyrics because they tore it to pieces before his eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel began showing interest in the show, and Zoe encouraged him to participate. Still, he never wanted to go up in front of others, so he rejected the idea immediately. However, he continued to remember Duke's words about music and remembered that he loved singing too. Duke heard Daniel singing, so he quickly went to see him to apologize for his rudeness the other day. After complimenting his voice, he advised him to sing on the show and invited him to his home so he could test how deep his pipe voice could go. However, he was worried that Daniel would see the shabby state of his house and consider him clumsy and dirty. But after arriving, Daniel volunteered to help him tidy up and suggested switching off the lights to save on electricity bills. He began stacking up the newspapers scattered on the floor, and Duke realized that Daniel must have had a great upbringing. Daniel told him his mom had taught him everything he knew, but he immediately apologized for doing too much and admitted it wasn't his place to teach Duke how he should clean his own home. However, Duke assured him that he had done nothing wrong, so they began their musical practice. During the practice, Daniel began doubting his ability to sing and wondered if he could really pull it off at the show. But Duke encouraged him and played a beautiful melody he had composed on his computer. Daniel recognized the tune and was happy to hear it, saying he always sang it every time he felt sad and lonely. Duke was touched by his warm response and became motivated to work harder after their practice. While he was walking Daniel home, they came across his grandmother's food stall. So after Daniel introduced himself as Duke's friend, she told him her grandson had many friends who were unpleasant, nasty little shits that bullied him. This stirred up unhappy memories for Duke, reminding him of the dreadful things his classmates had done to her. As she offered Daniel food, he graciously declined, for he understood the hardships she faced in her work and had no desire to further add to her burden. The following day at school, Duke gave Daniel the lyrics to their song, hoping they could begin practicing for the show. So later that day, Duke told Daniel that he felt his emotions while singing, but little did he know that Daniel indeed understood his struggles, yet could not reveal his secret to anyone. Duke reminded him that they had only 2 weeks left until the show, but they were still a long way from perfecting the song. He advised him to shift his focus to learning the song until he could sing it perfectly from the heart. Daniel retired for the night, thinking about Duke's challenges and feeling sorry for him while practicing at work. Not long after, Crystal appeared before his eyes, complimenting his voice and offering him a pack of sweets that would help him sing. Because of those magical sweets, Daniel began singing like a siren the next day, impressing Duke, who was unaware that Daniel had been practicing in another body. After several hours, Duke's bullies arrived and beat him up for practicing with Daniel, and they tried to force his friend to hit him too, but he refused. Later that night, he and his friend visited Fatso at his workplace, apologizing for hitting him in the past. But Daniel told him he understood he was afraid of the bullies and forgave him. They began to share their experiences with bullies and soon developed a unique bond with each other. However, when Duke began talking about Daniel's other persona, saying he was a new student who was kind to everyone, Vasco walked into their conversation, wondering if that was really the truth. They then told him that Daniel was actually a kind man, so he began to feel ashamed of himself, realizing that he had been wrong about Daniel after all. That said, he told Fatso that he could come by to train whenever he wanted. As days passed, Daniel and Duke continued to practice for the show, with Daniel improving every day. Meanwhile, at Vin's studio, he plotted a scheme to ruin their experience at the show. The day of the show finally arrived, and Daniel was feeling very anxious about his performance. But Duke encouraged him to stay calm and confident. Having spotted Crystal, he rushed to greet her, but she took him for a perv since she didn't recognize him in this other body. When Daniel tried to convince her that he had no bad intentions, her bodyguard suddenly grabbed him, but he shook off his grip. The man perceived it as a hostile reaction and an invitation for a fight, so he launched a straight kick at Daniel, but he defended himself with his arms. However, it was a feint attack, as the man swiftly changed tactics and delivered a powerful side kick to Daniel's head, immediately knocking him to the ground, coughing. The guard prepared to deliver a finishing blow, but Crystal urged him to stop. He refused and told her that he was ordered to annihilate anyone who tried to touch her. But Vasco arrived, calling himself Daniel's friend, and threatening to beat up the guard in a split second. The man punched Vasco in the face, but he remained unfazed. Despite being injured, he demanded that the guard remove his glasses so they could fight fairly. Crystal then stepped in before it escalated further and eventually departed with him, leaving Vasco and Daniel alone. Vasco fell to his knees, groaning in pain, realizing he wasn't strong enough to defeat the man in a fight. However, as they sat together, he offered Daniel a drink and apologized for the misunderstandings of the past. As the show finally began, Vin took the stage for his performance, thrilling the crowd with his fantastic song. In the backstage area, Daniel was very nervous, so Duke advised him to imagine singing for someone he deeply loved, telling him it would help calm his nerves. When they appeared on the stage, the crowd was amazed by Daniel's appearance. However, the host made fun of Duke, saying he looked like a completely different specimen, which brought laughter from the audience. When it was finally time to sing, Daniel took a deep breath, gazing at the crowd, but he was shocked by his terrible sound. Vin laughed at him, saying he sang like a goat, and the crowd's excitement began to wane. But Duke stepped up and took the microphone. He began delivering incredible lines that boosted Daniel's confidence, awakening his inner spirit and leaving the audience awed by their fantastic performance. At the end of the show, they were named winners, and Vin couldn't help but recognize the differences in their talents. So his producer left him, offering to work with Daniel and giving out his business card, apologizing for not recognizing their talents during the audition. When Duke thanked him for his kind words, the man told him the opportunity was being offered to Daniel alone, saying he was too fat and ugly to work with. Daniel declined the offer, unwilling to work with a man who acts like a total jerk. Meanwhile, inside a mansion, Crystal watched the talent show, wondering how Daniel knew the song she'd heard from Fatso singing at the store. After the show, she looked at a fat girl sleeping beside her, revealing that she was in the same situation as Daniel. Burn brighter than ever. Unleash your true power and watch the next video now.